So hello and welcome to It's Never Too Late, the podcast where we explore the inspiring journeys of women who've embraced change, achieved remarkable things and followed their dreams in midlife and beyond. I'm Clare Roberts-Molloy, Midlife Mindset Coach, and in each episode I'll be speaking with women who prove that age is just a number and it's never too late to chase your goals. So today I'm joined by the very marvellous Hannah Wilson. So Hannah is an independent educational consultant who specialises in leadership, development and training. She is a DFE coach for women leading in the education initiative and an advocate for flexible working, the focus for her MA in education. She specialises in lots and lots of areas, which I won't go into all of them because I'm sure she'll tell us more about herself shortly. But her specialist areas include diversity, inclusion and equality, professional learning and early careers teachers mentoring. She's also a huge collaborator and networker and has founded and is involved in a number of networks, which I'm sure we'll hear more about shortly. So welcome, Hannah.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining the It's Never Too Late podcast today. Now, we've known each other for a really long time, haven't we, Hannah?
1999.
1999. We always tell people that we met in the jungle in Ghana because that's absolutely true. Randomly, that is where we met. So I've known Hannah for a long time and she's always... We'll come on to role models a little bit later, but I think Hannah would be one of my role models if, in terms of how she presents herself and everything that she's achieved in her life. So would you like to...
Hey, that's a nice compliment.
Oh, no, absolutely. So Hannah, can you introduce yourself a little bit more to the audience?
Yes.
And tell us a little bit more about what you've achieved and in particular, what you've achieved since you've reached that heady height of 40 years old.
Sure. So it was interesting listening to the bio that you shared, because that was probably my bio a few years ago when I first left working in the system. So I spent 20 years being salaried, working within the school system, climbing the leadership ladder and getting to the heady heights of being an executive head teacher of 2 schools. And that was my 20-year kind of career plan. And turning 40 in March 2019 was a really important chapter for me. It's when I resigned from headship and when I threw it all away and ripped up the roadmap, really. And the reason why I came to that kind of reckoning was that, as we do when we have big birthdays, I'd spent 4 consecutive weekends with friends and family celebrating my 40th and with friends and family who weren't in my sector. Because when you're a teacher, you spend a lot of your life hanging out with other teachers. And I got the same message every weekend for 4 weeks. Hannah, you're doing so well. We're so proud of you. We love you dearly, but when are you going to stop working so bloody hard? And I literally got the same message every weekend. And it made me kind of stop and pause about the fact that I've worked really hard for 20 years to get here. Is this my next 20 years? Am I literally going to be holding space and doing this role for another 20 years? And I know a lot of fantastic heads who do that. But that wasn't what I necessarily saw on my roadmap for the next 20 years. Mm-hmm. So I did literally rip it up and hit resign. I think it did go down very well with my boss that I had turned 40 and 2 days later decided to resign. And then I kind of took stock of now what? I knew what each year or 2 years or 3 years was going to look like when I was moving up a ladder and moving up another system. And I didn't quite know what the next years would look like, but that quite excited me. I'm quite carefree, I'm quite a risk taker, I'm quite a pioneer anyway. That didn't faze me at all. And I deliberately almost held back from making a plan too quickly. And I returned to my intuition, really, my gut instinct of what is it that Hannah wants? What is it that Hannah needs? What is it that Hannah's good at? Rather than me being a pawn on someone else's kind of chessboard. And so I did quite a lot of work on actually redefining and refinding, I guess, at my core, who am I? What lights me up? What do I want to be doing? And going to that kind of Kigler model, really.
Brilliant. It's so interesting hearing you talk there because obviously I've recorded a few episodes now. And when I've asked the guests that similar question, what is it about turning 40? A lot of them speak about this, taking that time to reflect, that sort of pause and saying, okay, this is what I've done up to now. Is it actually what I want to do? And I don't know what it is about the age 40. Is it because we will have probably spent 2 decades in professional life?
I think it's that, isn't it? I think like 40 to 50 or 40 to 45, it's like you're climbing up, and then it's like the other half. If we're going to live to 90 or 95, I'll be living forever, like, ultimately. I think it's that kind of, I think it feels quite like a peak or pinnacle of either up and down or up and off or up and across. Yeah. But you're not going to carry on climbing. I don't know, that's the metaphor I kept thinking about, like mountains and peaks. Yeah.
Because I think that's an interesting image, isn't it? Because I think in the past, thinking about my parents' generation, very much was 40 was the peak, and then it was a downward slide, wasn't it? And I think a 40-year-old today is very different to a 40-year-old 10, 20, 30 years ago. And it's almost, using that mountain metaphor for me, it can be carry on. You can carry on going up now, but there's that rest stop. When you get to 40, there's that rest stop, isn't there? It's like base camp on Everest or something.
I feel like I've leapt from one mountain peak to another mountain peak, but the other mountain peak is a little bit further away. I can't quite see the top yet, but like, I haven't gone down to the bottom of the next mountain. I've just chosen a different mountain, and it's a little bit less clear about where I'm going to go. I don't know. It is an interesting analogy.
And does that excite you, it being unclear and that little bit of sort of a misty at the top of that mountain?
Yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. I think, if anything, an opportunity to do things differently, shake things up, be a bit disruptive, and find a different course has been actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. And not let myself be confined by everyone else's expectations. And a lot of people began to almost like make up my new story for me and call me a job title that wasn't my job title, and like assume I was going to do certain things. And I kind of resisted and pushed back on other people labeling me or defining me or compartmentalizing me, because that's what I'd rejected. I felt like I'd been a little bit trapped in the system. I actually really enjoyed the openness and the freedom and the liberation of just going with the flow for a change, rather than it always being this kind of linear upward climb.
Yeah. And that is what sort of education is defined, isn't it, by that linear climb, and being in boxes, and job titles are really, really important and sort of demonstrate your worth, aren't they? Especially in sort of education and other areas of corporate life. So what do you call yourself now?
It's taken me a while. That's why it's so interesting listening, because like, when I first rewrote my bio, like, when you say you're a teacher or a school leader or a head teacher, there's currency, and you can say in a word and people understand who you are. And I spent a long time thinking, like, what am I now leading with? And I have quite a portfolio of different things I'm good at and I care about. And they felt quite disparate. So I basically spent some time looking at, like, what are the links between them all? And I flipped it on its head. And ultimately, I'm a leadership development consultant, coach and trainer. That's what I do, my bread and butter. And that feeds me being a coach, and feeds me being a DIB advocate, and feeds me writing about flexible working. They're almost the kind of the layers that add onto it, but fundamentally are about developing, supporting, empowering people to lead themselves and lead others, and have a range of assets and resources to support them, I guess, on their journey.
So is that the thread that you feel that sort of holds everything together for you?
Yeah, because I've got 2 websites and 2 parts of my business. I've got the leadership training and coaching, I've got the diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging. But my contribution to that second bit is the strategic leadership and the kind of the cultural intelligence piece. And my thread on the coaching bit that differentiates me from some of my other coaches is that I bring that DIB lens to it. So I'm still thinking about, like, how much of a bridge do I need to build between those 2 aspects? But it's quite a lot from an outward-facing piece for people to look at. So I separate it into almost kind of like 2 trenches. And what's Hannah's bit and what's the kind of the collective team bit.
Brilliant. Been talking a lot about the threads that hold everything you do together. I think especially when you have a bit like, I do and you do, we have more of a portfolio, don't we? We don't do one single thing. And And I think that does confuse people because they go, well, what do you do? And it's finding that thread, that's way of simplifying it so you can communicate that message. For me, I always say I'm all about women's empowerment and helping women achieve their potential, because for me, that's what I found is the thread in everything I do. So it's interesting. People always want to put you in a box and always want to give you that label. And moving away from that does go against the grain, doesn't it? But we're mountaineers, apparently, Hannah, so we can... we can...
Yeah, also that fit in my personal life.
Well, the other thing I've always really admired about you is your confidence and your self-belief, which isn't evident in everybody. And a lot of women don't display those behaviours. And listening to you, you describe yourself as like a disruptor, as a pioneer. These are the things I'm good at. And you're so unapologetically open with your strengths. And I love that. Is that something that you've learned, or is that something that you've always had?
It's really interesting. I hosted a women leadership dinner last night, and this came up about the message you receive as a child and what girls receive versus boys. And a lot of the women were parents, and they were talking about the message they give to their children. And a couple of us were talking about the fact that how we were brought up, it's me and my sister, and mum and dad perhaps gave us messages that our male counterparts were getting, that we could do anything and be anything if we put our mind to it. There were no hurdles, there were no barriers. And both my parents were self-employed, both my parents were self-made. They didn't have a lot of qualifications between them. And I think it was that whole Audrey Hepburn quote about impossible or I'm possible. We've never been told that anything is not achievable or impossible if we put our mind to it. So I think that growth mindset was very much part of our family upbringing. And I think the extra layer to that was we were very much brought up in a household with resilience and grit. And when things went wrong, we literally physically brushed ourselves off and were encouraged to get back on it. Whether I'd had a ski accident or a car accident or a horse riding accident, there were quite a few accidents not in my childhood. We were always encouraged to pull ourselves together, brush ourselves off and bounce forward. I think that served me really well as well. I think the bit about knowing your strengths and owning your strengths, I've done a lot of self-work. I've had a lot of coaching. I'm also a coach myself. And I've never really suffered from limiting beliefs or the imposter syndrome. And so I find it really curious that that's such a big theme in so much of my network and so much of my work. I don't know what that is, whether it's just my personality profile or where I've worked. And I don't know if that's the bit that I haven't totally unlocked. What was it in my conditioning socially? I didn't get that memo that you're supposed to have the imposter syndrome.
I think we're supposed to. I think it's an important side effect. And I've done a lot of work around sort of what's the imposter syndrome, or as I prefer to call it, the imposter experience. Because I don't think it's a constant in our life.
No.
Moments of we experience it at moments during our career and lives. So it's really interesting, and it just makes me think of the book, The 1%. Michael Gladwell, is it? The 1%, and
Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell,
yeah.
And when you look at the achievements of people in the world today who've achieved great things, it's that unique combination and situations that they find themselves in that lead to where they are and what their behaviours are and what they've been able to achieve. And that sounds like you in terms of that unique messaging really that you got as a child. So how was that resilience and that growth mindset? How did that aid you when you pressed resign and decided to rip up that roadmap and take that next step?
So, I've got a very strong sense of my own value system, and I've always had a very black and white, what's right and what's wrong. And I have had to be quite courageous at moments in my career and say no to things or remove myself from situations that aren't okay. But I think there's a boundary piece and a self-care piece that I've activated quite a few times. And ultimately, my gut was telling me a few things were off. And then those messages around my 40th reinforced that. And when I resigned, I was quite decisive in it, but how it was received just completely reinforced that I needed to go. Because how some of my seniors then behaved around me and treated me, I was really unimpressed. And this was all happening in my 40th chapter, where my 40th was in March. I resigned at the end of March, went to Iceland with two of my best friends for our collective 40th. And then at the summer term's quite a good term in school life. Just bought a new house, the weather's great. And this all then like potentially was going to dampen what was my 40th year. And I refused to let it. So when I resigned and very kindly got put on gardening leave, I was like, I'm not going to sit at home and mope. I'm not going to sit at home and be miserable. I'm not going to let these buggers like ruin my 40th year. I just spent all my money on my house. And I rang my parents and I said, can you let me put on money? Because I'm going to South America traveling. And they're like, what? I was like, let's need to get out of the country. I need a couple of months where I almost want to like regroup, decompress, but also rewrite my story. And I want there to be a silver lining in it, whereby when I think of that year, 2019 and my 40th, I don't really think about resigning and being put on gardening leave. I think about being a Machu Picchu and like the parallel there's mountains, like the kind of I did 5 countries in a couple of months. And they're the memories. That's what I remember of my 40th year, that re-ownership, that reframe, that redefinition of what I wanted my story to be rather than what other people wanted my story to be.
Yeah. And I love, again, we're using another metaphor there of a book, of, your chapter, writing the story. And I think for me, that's what I really try to get across to people, is that you are the author of your own story. For me, it's the most exciting thing about being alive. You do have that choice. Some of your choices might be limited by your situation and your context, but you still have choices to influence and impact what the next chapter could be. And I just love that. And I love that whole metaphor. We're talking in lots of metaphors today, but
I'm an English teacher. I was
going to say it's because we both love reading and English and language and everything else. I think, as you probably just alluded to there, you are incredibly well travelled. And I know, having known you for so long, that you don't let things stand in your way very easily. But I wonder, are there still things on Hannah Wilson's list that you haven't done, or places that you haven't yet been?
Yeah, my bucket list is endless.
I was going to say, do you have a bucket list?
Oh, big time. I had 40 things I wanted to do for my 40th, and I think I've got through about 12 of them. But I'm quite an opportunistic person, and I think you know that about me, Claire, that yes, I have places I want to go, but I get random invitations and opportunities to go to other places. And I haven't done the kind of the 10 countries that everyone else I know. I've been to Australia and New Zealand because I don't want to go there. But I've ended up in Ghana and Mozambique and Brazil. So I kind of say yes to perhaps the route off the path sometimes. I don't really get FOMO, and there's lots of places I do still want to go. So my exciting news is I'm going to South Korea in February. And like South Korea is not necessarily somewhere on my top 10 places for my travel destination, but I've been asked to go and speak at a Women Leadership Conference. So I'm now spending February half term as a tourist and 3 days at a conference. And like that's somewhere that will then be on my list and in my passport that I wasn't necessarily looking to go to. That really excites me.
Yeah. I mean, that's just an amazing opportunity. And I know your work, the work that you do, has given you so many opportunities. You've just come back from Dubai.
Yeah. I've spent 10 days out in the UAE.
So you've but you've created that. You've created those opportunities for yourself through the work that you do. And yeah, going to South Korea probably would be somewhere you wouldn't ever have thought of going as a tourist particularly. But as you say, you've created those opportunities and you get that unusual stamp in your passport, and who knows where that might lead. So what else is there? So I know also you've published books, you've travelled widely, you've got a successful business that's branching out into other areas. You've achieved a lot of the things that some of our listeners will have on their list to achieve. So has there been any sort of learning that you've had from that journey of achieving all those things?
My thing is like what you put out there is what you get back. And if the opportunity is not there, I find a way and I create the opportunity. So we both create networks. And last night I was hosting dinner for 24 women from Bath, where I've recently moved. And they're always curious, like, why I set the network up. So it was our 5th quarterly dinner. I've been down here for just over a year. And when I moved down here, I was looking for a network and there wasn't one. So I created one. They were like, well, we all knew there wasn't one, but none of us had created one. Like that's just who I am. That when I see a gap, I step into that space. And this is my third women's network that I've set up, but I quite often then when I relocate, pass it on to someone else, nurtures it and runs it. So I think there's something about connectivity, but also community building. That I create belonging for myself by creating belonging for others. And everyone last night said what a wonderful experience it was spending 3 hours with 24 like-minded women who you wouldn't normally meet and you wouldn't normally connect with. So that to me is one thing about seeing the gap, finding the gap and stepping into that gap. And I've taught myself into a lot of promotions where I've gone to the head and said, I've realised that no one's leading on this. Do you need someone to lead on this? Would you like me to lead on this? And I've almost like created my own way of finding a leadership opportunity that's then ultimately become a paid bit of work. The UAE has been an interesting piece because a lot of my network's now international, but virtually. So I think like the beauty of lockdown in the last few years has been that we haven't got boundaries now on our work. And I can coach someone in Hong Kong via Zoom. I can go to a conference in Canada. Like I think that's almost expanded our reach. And I worked with quite a lot of UAE schools during the lockdown period. And then I got invited to go and speak at a conference in February. I spoke at a conference in February, and at least 10 female leaders came to speak to me afterwards to say, we need you out here. Would you come and run a conference with us? So on Saturday, I hosted a conference for 200 women in Dubai. And that was just mega exciting. And that's going to reap benefits like this month, next year, in 10 years' time, because I've made 200 fantastic connections. So I think for me, it's that. Like I think where you put your energy is what you then reap the benefits of.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we are really similar in that we do see the gaps. We see the gaps. And I think it's fundamental when people are looking to start a business or to launch a new product or anything like that, whether that's a network or something more charitable or something directly linked to their business, it's finding the gap that exists for you. Because if it's existing for you, it's probably existing for a lot of other women as well. And that's why I started 2 women's networks myself, because there was a gap. That's why I started my charity, because I was like, who's doing this? Who's tackling this issue? And there wasn't anybody. So fill the gap. It means that we don't get much sleep, Hannah. This is the only issue, isn't it? When we're the ones filling the gaps all the time.
Sleep's the one thing that keeps me going. I think being an early bird helps me. That I get up early and I know you are as well. I get loads done in the time when most people are still warming up. My best thinking time is like 7 o'clock in the morning. So it's that. I think it's knowing when you can optimize your time and energy and getting the best out of yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Anna, what's next for you?
What's next? I've been asked this quite a lot recently because like my business is 5 years old. And if I think about my career, I normally get bored and itchy feet like 3 to 4 years and bounce on to the next thing. When you own your own business, I have been asked by a lot of people, are you going to sell your business? I didn't build a business to sell it. I'm very happy and fulfilled in my business right now. I think it's more of the same. I think it's sustaining it. I think it's building efficiencies into ways of working for me. I'm working with a coach for me and a business mentor for the business, and that's really interesting, getting those 2 parallels. So I've got my own book coming out next year because I have worked on lots of books, but I'm often the co-editor or contributor. So I'm working on my own book for my DEI work. I do really want to write a leadership book. I keep being asked about that. So that's 2 things. Always looking for new opportunities, really, to collaborate with people and to visit places and to impact, whilst maintaining some sort of work-life flow, harmony at the same time. But I think the beauty is that I can take my laptop. I was in a really nice hotel for 10 days in Dubai. My business has carried on running whilst I was in Dubai. Like that's the beauty of our work as well. Yeah.
That's the dream, isn't it? It's not being tied to any one location, but having that choice, just having that choice about how you run your life and what experiences you say yes to. So since turning 40, Hannah, can you sum up how you as a person have evolved?
I think I've deinstitutionalized myself in many ways. I don't think I realized how institutionalized I've become. And I've got a strong sense of who I am, and I know who I am. I'd still become a bit more of my employer rather than myself. And I think leaving headship, I had to peel back quite a lot of layers. I remember who Hannah was when Hannah wasn't a school leader and a head teacher. So I think it's really has been quite liberating, quite empowering. And I don't have to say yes to things anymore that I don't want to do. I think things that were perhaps perceived as my weaknesses or areas of development when I was in a paid role, i.e. my critical friendship and my courageous conversations, and I get paid to do those things, and they're things that I'm invited to do and get appreciated for. So I think stepping out has just further affirmed and validated who I am, what I do, the strengths I have, and the impact I want to have. And that's quite lovely, to be honest, you know?
Yeah, it is. It is. And I always wonder, what's the next evolution? We're just always evolving, aren't we? Our businesses evolve as people. And I know I'm a few years older than you, but I've thoroughly enjoyed my 40s. And I approach 50 with excitement, because I'm like, if I've evolved this much in this space of time, what could be next? And I think it's an exciting journey to be on, and not one to be feared. That the media might have us fear aging, but
it doesn't bother me at all, really. And I think it is, like people say to me, if you won the lottery, would you carry on working so hard? Yeah, because I don't feel like I'm working most of the time. That whole idea of, I used to have a full-time job on my passion projects. My passion project is now my business. It's my life. It's my purpose. I don't feel like I'm working most of the time. And I think it's your relationship with what you do. And I could spend less time thinking about it, but doing it all, but I'd still be thinking about it. I'd still be writing about it. My circle of people, we're all on the same kind of page when it comes to a lot of these things. So for me, I've definitely got that harmony, that flow going between aspects of my life that used to jar in some ways.
It's wonderful, isn't it? And they do say, if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life, don't they?
Yeah, there you go.
And that's where what we're doing, that's what we're achieving. And that's brilliant. So thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing everything you've got to say, your journey, your stories, your advice and your guidance for the listeners. But before you go, I just want to ask you one more question. And that is, if you had one piece of advice for the listeners who may be thinking that it's too late for them to chase their dreams, what would your advice be?
It's never too late. And that whole analogy about say yes and work it out later, that's very much how I see things. There's always a way. So don't go into immediate no and regret it. I don't have FOMO in any aspect of my life. I say yes, and if I don't know how to work it out, I find someone who does.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you once again, Hannah. To our listeners, I hope today's conversation has reminded you that no matter where you are in life, it's never too late to follow your passions and achieve your goals. So until next time, keep believing in yourself and in your dreams, and I'll see you later. Bye.